Let's begin with that breaking news out of New York in the last hour or so. The judge in Donald Trump's hush money trial has ruled the former president has violated a gag order and found him in contempt of court. He's been fined a total of $9,000 for 9 breaches. Well, let's go straight to the court and straight to our North America correspondent, Neda Tawfik. And Neda, tell us a little more about the fine and the judge's comments when actually issuing that fine.
Yeah, well, Matthew, the judge issued his ruling right at the start of court today. And in his ruling, he essentially rejected Donald Trump's lawyer's argument that these social media posts and these posts on his campaign websites were responding to political attacks. He found in only one of the 10 instances that there was a tenuous correlation, as he put it, to some remarks by one of the key witnesses in this trial, Michael Cohen. But otherwise, he sided with prosecutors and said that Donald Trump had willfully violated this gag order 9 out of 10 times. Now, under New York law, he's only able to fine Donald Trump $1,000 per violation. So he did that, but he also said that given Donald Trump is wealthy, he might not be discouraged from continuing to violate this gag order with such a small fine. And so he did say that jail was an option on the table if there are further violations. Now, Donald Trump has until close of business on Friday to pay the fine. It is obviously a drop in the bucket compared to the hundreds of thousands he is facing in his other civil fraud trial. But he also has to take down those offending posts by this afternoon, Matthew.
And Neda, briefly, in terms of the latest from the witness box, tell us the latest.
Well, the third witness has now finished cross-examination by the defense, the prosecution. He was Michael Cohen's former banker, and he was really just kind of outlining the way Michael Cohen opened up a shell company, an LLC, to then pay Stormy Daniels' lawyer, transfer her the $130,000 hush money payment. So remember, this is ultimately a case about falsifying business records. So prosecutors have presented to the jury those transactions to help prove their case.
Neda Tawfik there in New York, outside of the courthouse. Thanks very much. Well, earlier on the programme, I spoke to the criminal defence lawyer and former prosecutor Randy Zellin, who gave me his thoughts about that fine and the broader case.
I don't know if it was Shakespeare that said it, but this is really much ado about nothing. $9,000 to Donald Trump is $9 for the rest of us. So certainly Mr. Trump won that round. In fact, for him to argue that he is treated differently, he's right. For him to say he's treated unfairly is wrong. Anyone else would have been in jail from the get-go and would still be sitting in jail. So chalk the $9,000 up to flicking it off the shoulder, win for Trump.
I understand what you're saying, but we heard from the judge that clear warning. Now, there have been repeated breaches of this gag order over the last few weeks, and yet we've only got to this stage now. Is there any realistic prospect of jail time if there are further breaches, do you think?
Legally, yes. Practically, no. Judge Merchan knows very well that to even entertain seriously the thought of jail, to actually incarcerate the former president, would play directly into the former president's hands. It would probably guarantee some level of unrest in this country. It would probably guarantee Mr. Trump an even more solidified base and maybe even help him get reelected. So I think the last thing that Judge Merchan is interested in doing is giving something that he knows that the former president wants. It also plays into the narrative that Judge Merchan is conflicted. And I think it would make it easier for the former president to argue in the higher court. See, of course he is operating under a conflict of interest. He put me in jail.
Interesting. Let's move to the wider trial, because this week 3 starting. What have you made about the case so far, both as someone who's an expert both in defence and prosecution?
The difficulty here in terms of if you want to try to keep score. It's a matter of everyone understanding that the prosecution simply doing well, doing okay, is not going to cut it. It's not good enough. In the United States, proof beyond a reasonable doubt is such an incredibly high bar for the prosecution. If we think of the preponderance of the evidence as tipping the scale from 50-50 to 51-49, proof beyond a reasonable doubt is like 90-10. So to say, well, the prosecution had a good day, prosecution had a good week, not going to do it. The prosecution has to be killing it to have a realistic shot of getting a conviction. And I think here, there's way too much confusion in terms of what's legal, what's not legal. Is it legal for a tabloid to pay for a story to kill it? To open up a bank account in order to make a payment? Can you really influence an election through the entry of these false numbers in the books and records? Is this using the system of criminal justice to weaponize, to take the presumptive nominee out of the race? Way too much going on here. So right now, prosecution's okay, but they're not winning.
I get what you're saying, but the counterpoint would be that if the prosecution can prove Donald Trump knew what Michael Cohen was doing, and we're told there are tapes potentially as evidence. We know that Donald Trump, very scrupulous about every check he signed. If they can prove that connection, then presumably the prosecution would be home and dry, wouldn't it?
Technically, yes. Again, there is a difference here between the technical and the reality. I think as far as technically, you may very well be right. There may be evidence that Mr. Trump had knowledge, which is one component of a criminal case here, and he intended to commit a crime, which is the other component. Even if that's true, there may be one juror sitting in that jury who is simply not going to convict the former president, if for no other reason than the former president has been saying, you're going to convict me. It only takes one in the United States for a hung jury, a mistrial, which would be a huge win for the former president, because this case would not be retried again before the election. So technically, you're absolutely right.
Well, that was Randy Zelen talking to me a little earlier on today's Verified Live. I want to turn to that important story here in London today, that sword attack, with police confirming a